Here we go, college football fans. This one is for you, especially if you admire excellence in college football coaches. You know, when a football coach reaches the stratosphere in terms of public opinion and fan loyalty, even people who aren't Alabama football fans will know that it's important to take notice. Today's program will explore the incredible life and career of Paul Bear Bryant. Even if you don't follow sports, this fellow's life is worth learning about. First question we need to ask, for those of you who may be so young that you don't remember Bear Bryant, is this: who was he? We think of him today as a legend in college football. Here's some things that make him a human being. He loved animals, especially horses. He was very superstitious, and he had a little lucky silver dollar with him at every game because he thought it helped him win. He was a completely natural public speaker, and evidence of that is the number of incredibly wonderful quotes that are attributed to him down through the ages. He loved to read. It was his passion, really. And he would read everything. Good things, serious literature, but also fun things. And he would talk to his football players about what he was reading because he wanted to encourage them to broaden themselves, to think about something besides sports. He also loved to gamble. And he frequently went to Las Vegas, but he never bet on a game. Now, especially for those of you Roll Tiders, the Alabama football team, the fans, what do you think of when you think of Bear Bryant? Do you remember his hardscrabble upbringing? Do you remember his incredible coaching record? This is what comes to mind for me. A simple hat. In Capstone Report, this is written about the houndstooth. Prior to Bear Bryant, that pattern was one that was woven into Scottish Lowlands clothing. Gun club patrons and men would wear it to show style. Since then, it's become popular around the world and used for just about every kind of clothing. The most popular modern use, though, besides crimson-tied hats, is for dresses and fashion. It came about this way. Bear didn't find the hat. Bear was given the hat. Jets owner Sonny Whirlwind gave him the houndstooth hat because he thought maybe it would get a little support for the AFL, which was competing with the NFL. The Jets wanted Joe Namath, and they hoped that maybe Bear could influence his quarterback to come to them. Bryant loved that hat. He wore it to one game, and that's all it took because the fans saw it, noticed it, loved it, and expected it from that point on. The legend of the Bryant hat was born. The University of Alabama has two colors, crimson and white. And as soon as Bryant started wearing that houndstooth hat, many considered houndstooth to be sort of an unofficial color for the school as well. There's a wonderful museum on the campus of the University of Alabama. It's called the Paul W. Bryant Museum. And it's a beautiful place filled with wonderful memorabilia about his time as coach at Alabama. One of the most popular exhibits within there is a Waterford crystal replica of that hat that was designed especially for the museum. But there's more to Coach Bryant than just a fancy signature hat. To find out who the real Bear was, I went to two books, one written about him and one written by him. Both are excellent, and I recommend that you read both of them because together you'll get a pretty good balanced picture of the bear. In 1974, Bear, The Hard Life and Good Times of Alabama's Coach Bryant was published. And this is one that was written by Coach Bryant himself with a ghostwriter who was not so much a ghost, John Underwood. Then in 1996, Coach, The Life of Paul Bear Bryant was published, and its author was Keith Donovan. The difference in the two books is this. The similarity is that they both cover his life and cover it pretty well. Bear, written by Bear, gives you an inside look at the man's personality, at the things that were important to him, the things that he truly loved, that he had a passion for. Donovan's book is more scholarly in that it takes a look at Bear Bryant, his life and his career, and he does it in a more objective fashion than Bear does himself. Either way, you read both, you get a good, firm picture of this incredible man. Paul William Bear Bryant was born on September the 11th, 1913, and he passed away January 26, 1983, 27 days after he retired from coaching. Where did his life begin? You look no further than Cleveland County, Arkansas. That's right, the legendary football coach associated directly with the University of Alabama's football program wasn't even from Alabama. This map shows you highlighted where Cleveland County is. It's one of the poor sections in a poor state, but known for good people, and the Bryants were good people. Bryant's roots in this farming area instilled in him critical values which were very, very important to him throughout his life. Those were the values of hard work, perseverance, and resilience. That, each one of those, would shape his coaching philosophy. The closest town to where he grew up was Fordyce. It's a rural Arkansas town with a population of around 3,000. He grew up on Morrow Bottom, which is, as he puts it in his book, nothing more than just a little stop. There aren't any buildings other than the farmhouse or two, and maybe a barn or two, and some pasture land, maybe, some farmland, maybe. It's a poor area again. He was the 11th child born out of 12, and 3 of those died in infancy. Of course, everybody in Fordyce, everybody anywhere around there claims to be the birthplace of Paul Bear Bryant. As well they should. This is a picture, the only one that I can find, of the Bear Bryant's family, the whole family. You see the little blue arrow here pointing to the kind of stocky kid, barefoot in front, standing by his papa with his hand on his papa's knee. That's Bear as a child. Once upon a time, he was a little thing. The future Bear loved being barefoot. And one of the reasons was he almost never had a pair of shoes that actually fit. His daddy was William Monroe Bryant. He's a sharecropper, and he was a truck farmer. He also was a man really not ever in good health, and certainly not so by the time Bear came along. He had problems with high blood pressure, he had lung problems. He just generally was in bad health. Bear's mother was Dora Ida Kilgore. She was 100% homemaker, except as her husband's health declined, her responsibilities to keep the truck farm moving fell heavier and heavier on her shoulders. She was from a family of Texas farmers, so she understood farm life, and she ran the farm pretty well. Bear, in his biography, writes, "Our whole income was those truck patches. Besides plowing and chopping, it was my job to draw water for the cows, which is an impossible task because you can't fill up a cow, and to hitch up and drive Mama on her selling trips to town." Bryant's childhood was hard. It was hard scrabble. They were just barely making ends meet, and there are a lot of people in the family. Times were tough too. The thing, though, out of all that bothered Bear the most was when he had to go into Fordyce and get kidded by the city kids about his poverty. He would drive the two mules, pulling their old farm wagon to town every Saturday so his mother could sell eggs and vegetables in town. He wore his only clothes, which would be a pair of overalls, and shoes that were too small. School was held back in those days on Saturdays until noon, and so invariably Bryant and the wagon would be at the school at the time the school kids were let out, and they made fun of him. You know, it's interesting when you read both books, you realize that for the rest of his life, Bear Bryant never forgot that humiliation. He also never forgot his parents' religious fervor, which at times he was at cross purposes with. He wrote, "My folks were very religious. They wouldn't go to picture shows or anything, and neither of them ever saw a football game. Years later, when we took teams to bowl games, I got Mama to go along, but all she did was sit with the children in the hotel. I didn't even smoke in front of her until the last few years of her life, when I finally had to admit what a hypocrite I was." There's always been a lot of question about how Bear became known as Bear Bryant. Paul's a perfectly fine name. Where did Bear come from? Part of the problem was at 13, he already weighed 180 pounds and he stood 6'1". He was a big guy, big little kid. And he also was subject to dares. And one day when there was a circus in town, Bear was convinced by friends that he needed to wrestle a live bear while attending a little sideshow at the theater. He had to do it, not just because it was going to pay something, but also because he wanted to impress the girls. During the match, the bear's muzzle came off, and Bryant jumped out of the ring and did not get paid for the time he spent in it. No money, but the nickname Bear stuck. He wrote about this event, saying, "That bear started acting pretty ornery, and when I looked up, his muzzle was off. I felt this burning on the back of my ear, and when I touched it, I got a handful of blood. I was being eaten alive. I jumped off that stage and nearly killed myself, hitting the empty front seats with my shins. I still have the marks on my legs where I crashed into those seats. The man with the bear skipped out. All I got out of the whole thing was a nickname." But he also, because of his growth, his size, and his sort of fearless attitude, he caught the attention of the Fordyce High School football coach. And so he found his first football home as a mighty redbug for Fordyce High School. And here he learned the importance of preparation. Later, he wrote, "It's not the will to win that matters. Everyone has that. It's the will to prepare to win that matters." Bryant was a redbug indeed. He played offensive lineman, defensive end, and tackle for the high school, the Fordyce High School Redbugs. He was big and strong. He'd grown up on a farm doing heavy labor, so he was a force to be contended with. He loved going to Little Rock to play ball. That marked the first time he had ever been inside of a train, and it was also the first time he'd ever ridden in an elevator. In 1931, he earned all-state honors for the Arkansas High School football champion Redbucks. In 1926, when Bryant went out for football, there wasn't enough money in the family to buy proper athletic shoes, so he screwed cleats into his regular shoes so that he could play. That meant, of course, that everywhere he went, on and off the football field, he was wearing cleats because they were the only shoes he owned. Although he was already recruited by Alabama, Bryant had to take high school classes at Tuscaloosa High School when he got there. And the reason was he had graduated from high school in Arkansas at 17, but the University of Alabama had some requirements that Arkansas didn't. So Bryant had to take a few classes, especially language classes. He was never a strong student academically, and he always readily admitted that. He told his players that. While he was taking those high school classes, though, he practiced with the team, with Alabama, particularly with the group that were being held out for their freshman year. They would be playing the next year. Bear said about this, "One day Coach Thomas was scrimmaging the varsity and trying in vain to get the line to block freshman punts. They were doing a sorry job. Coach called across the running track for me. He said, 'All right, gentlemen, let this little high school boy show you how.' We lined up and I gave the end a forearm to get by him and threw myself in front of the kicker." He was fearless, and he wanted the coach to notice him. His career as a player is a pretty good career for collegiate football. He lettered from 1933 to 1935, and he graduated in 1936. At Alabama as a player, he was twice named to the All-Southeastern Conference third team and once to the second team. During his time there as a player, Alabama amassed a record of 23 victories, 3 losses, and 2 ties, and was named national champion in 1934. The Tide defeated Stanford in the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day, 1935. It was just one little bone. That was Bear Bryant's answer to the Atlanta Constitution sports editor, Ralph McGill. This is one of his favorite stories of his time as a player for Alabama. When Alabama played Tennessee in 1935, Bryant played the game with a broken bone in his leg. He actually played with a broken bone. The sports editor for the Atlanta Constitution, Ralph McGill, was very skeptical about that story, so he drove to Tuscaloosa and demanded to see Bryant's x-rays. Once he saw them and realized the man really did have a broken bone, he apologized to Bryant, and Bryant's response was, "It was just one little bone." Bear Bryant certainly noticed the girls when he was growing up, but poverty and work at home and all the rest of it pretty much kept him from having too much of a dating life. And then Mary Harmon Black comes along. He writes this, "Mary Harmon Black was a campus beauty queen from a very prominent Birmingham family. She was just about everything a girl could be at Alabama in those days. Miss University of Alabama, a cadet colonel, the sweetheart of one thing or another. You name it, she was it. Plus, she was the best looking gal you and her eye had ever laid eyes on. And she had an automobile." Despite very obvious differences in their family background, the two became a true love match. The handsome football player won the beauty queen's heart. in spite of certain truisms which she was taught by her sorority. As Bear describes it, Mary Harmon always said the football players had a reputation for being the best dancers and the worst risks. Here's a picture of her. She was born in 1915 in Troy, Alabama. Her parents were James Henderson and Ida Mae Harmon Black. She graduated in 1933 from Phillips High School, which was a very fine school. She attended Arlington Hall Junior College in Arlington, Virginia to prep before she enrolled at the University of Alabama. There she was a member of Alpha Gamma Delta sorority, and interestingly, her chapter sponsored defensive end Paul Bryant on the 1934 Alabama Crimson Tide football team's trip to the 1935 Rose Bowl. Bear knew of her. He had seen her around, but he'd never met her until one Monday when he was leaving the cafeteria and she stopped him, calling him by name. He was very impressed that she even knew who he was. She asked how he was feeling. She had seen him, it turns out, the week before at the football game and had seen him limping. The two had a little bit of a chat for a while, and then he asked her for a date, summoned great courage to do this. She got out her little black book. She flipped through the pages, and she said that they might be able to go out in a couple of weeks when she was free. To which Bear said, "Shoot, honey, I was talking about tonight," and he walked off. Later that afternoon, Mary Harmon called the dorm where he was and said that after all, she was free that evening. They went out then, and they never stopped going out. He had made the comment that she was everything, Miss Everything at Alabama. This is her ROTC cadet colonel's uniform, the actual one, and they have it at, of course, the museum. 8 months after she called him and said, after all, she was free that night, they eloped. It was a secret elopement in 1935. They went to Ozark, Alabama, Dale County, and they were married on June 2nd, 1935. A justice of the peace performed the ceremony shortly after Mary Harmon had graduated. You see, they couldn't disclose their marriage. They had to keep it a secret because Bear would have lost his athletic scholarship as a married person. Married players just lost them. So they kept their marriage a secret for 5 months. Later, they were public with their marriage. They went on to have a delightful marriage. And in 1936, their first child, a daughter, Mae Martin, was born. And in 1944, their son, Paul Jr., was born. The children enjoyed their childhoods very much out of the spotlight. Both parents were just insistent that their children not grow up as privileged, although they were just by birth. So they didn't want them to have too much attention. And Mary Harmon in particular took great pains to make certain that those childhoods were as normal and down to earth as possible. Today, nearly everybody associates Bear Bryant with the Alabama Crimson Tide, but the truth is his coaching career involved several other important programs. His assistant coaching career was this. He started in 1936 as line coach for the varsity at Alabama. Then in 1940, he became assistant coach at Vanderbilt. In 1941, on December 7th, he was traveling to Arkansas where he was expecting to be named the new head coach for the Razorbacks. Over the radio came the news of Pearl Harbor. Bryant turned his car around, returned to Nashville, and enlisted the next day. He was enlisted in the U.S. Navy and he was honorably discharged as a lieutenant commander. This is his picture. He's rather serious looking, I think, but those were very serious times. When he enlisted in the Navy, Mary Harmon did the most practical thing. She took their daughter and moved in with her parents for the duration of the wartime. His military time was also coaching time for Bear Bryant. First, he was sent to North Africa with his group. His troop ship was rammed, and the captain gave orders for everybody to stay on board. Bryant disobeyed and abandoned ship, and he survived while more than 200 servicemen died. Back in North Carolina, Bryant was a lieutenant commander to train enlistees. He formed the North Carolina Navy pre-flight football team called the Cloudbusters, which became the nucleus of his first winning team at the University of Maryland. Mary Harmon and little May moved in with her parents, as I said, and Paul Jr. was born in December of '44. Mary decided to remain with the children while he coached at the University of Maryland in 1945. One of Bear Bryant's talents was synthesizing life into some pretty clear lessons. And these were lessons that he had learned and continued to live by, and lessons that he instilled into the players who worked for him. This is one. When you make a mistake, there are only 3 things you should ever do about it. 1, admit it. 2, learn from it. And 3, don't repeat it. Bryant's career as a head coach started at the University of Maryland with the Terrapins in 1945. The highlights of that year were that he led Maryland to a 6-2-1 record, which was a fine record for the Terrapins. He decided to leave, though, after 1 year because he thought the university president had undermined his authority over the suspension of a player. That interference from a university president planted the seed in Bryant's mind. To be truly successful, he should not only be the head coach, but also the athletic director. His next stint came at the University of Kentucky. He was a Wildcat from 1946 to 1953 as their head coach. In '46, the first year his team had a 7-3 record. In 1949, it compiled an 8-3 record and won the Orange Bowl. In 1950, it compiled an 11-1 record and won the Sugar Bowl, and he was named SEC Coach of the Year. And 2 years later, the team won the Cotton Bowl. So as a player and a coach, Bryant had already competed in the 4 major games of that era: the Rose, the Sugar, the Orange, and the Cotton. Mary Harmon and both children moved with Bryant to Lexington, Kentucky in 1946, and Mary Harmon was pretty happy there. Then they moved with him to College Station, Texas in 1954 when he became an Aggie. That Southern girl was, as Bear Bryant describes it, staggered when she saw College Station in Texas. He was at A&M as head coach from 1953 to 1957. His team went 1-9 in the first year and was put on probation for recruiting violations. It got better quickly. In '56, the team record was 9-0-1, and they won the Gator Bowl. In '57, the team record was 8-3, and they were invited to the Tangerine Bowl, and John David Crow won the Heisman Trophy. From '54 to '58, Bryant produced a Southwest Conference championship team and his only Heisman winner, Crow. When he started coaching at A&M, the first year he made what he called later a rookie coach mistake. He decided he wanted to put the players, the team, through a training camp. So he picked Junction, Texas as the place to do it, very far out of the way place. He loaded up his team on school buses. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know how long they were going to be there. They just knew they were going to the coach's training camp. 2/3 of that team quit before the camp was over. So he only had to have one bus to bring them back. That team went 1-9. His only losing season as a head coach. The fewer than 30 players who remained became the core of the undefeated team that won the 1956 Southwest Conference Championship. Bryant told Time magazine in an interview in 1980 that he didn't know better about how he treated the boys at Junction City. He thought he was doing the right thing. He said they had to put up with my stupidity. I believe if I had been one of those players, I'd have quit too. When he died, the only piece of jewelry that Bryant was wearing was a diamond ring that had been given to him by the Junction boys from his first training camp on their 25th anniversary of that camp. John David Crow was clearly one of his stars. 1957, he became Bryant's only Heisman Trophy winner. He was from Spring Hill, Louisiana. Not unlike Bryant in his growing up. An accident when he was born had left the left side of his face disfigured. He looked as though he had had a stroke. And because of that, he always seemed to try harder to do more. And Bryant recognized that and applauded him. He became the prototypical Bryant football player. This is what John David Crow said about Bayer. Coach Bryant had this way of creating a kind of insecurity. No matter who you were, you felt like your job was always in jeopardy. So if you were his type of player, you were going to do whatever it took to please him. No matter what he asked of you, if you were his type of player, you weren't even going to think about quitting. Just the word itself created a bitter taste. Here's Bayer, 1957, in his official little Aggie outfit for it. Serious-minded. He had big plans ahead for his life, and he was doing his best to do it right. In spite of some bad publicity, frankly, surrounding that Junction City training camp, his work at A&M attracted some very serious attention. Coach Bryant was about to make the last coaching change of his career. He left Texas A&M, and he described it this way. I left Texas A&M because my school called me. When Mama calls, you just have to come running. His career as head coach at the University of Alabama is something that legends are made of. He coached there from 1958 to 1982. He was appointed head coach and athletic director in 1958. His first team won 5 games. But that was more than the previous 3 seasons. As he had done at other places, he brought Alabama back. His highlights, there's so many, but here's just a run. He won 6 national championships, 61, 64, 65, 73, 78, and 79. He changed Alabama's football culture. And this may be the most important thing that he brought to Alabama. He instilled discipline, teamwork, and personal character development. He led his team to 24 bowl appearances and over a dozen conference titles. They enjoyed 25 winning seasons, and his teams won 323 games. He was named College Football Coach of the Year 3 different times. He was not without controversy. He had a temper, and he liked to protect his team. He was known occasionally to fuss at referees. This is what he had to say about that. Don't worry about making friends. Don't worry about making enemies. Worry about winning. Because if you win, your enemies can't hurt you, and if you lose, your friends can't stand you. He was determined at Alabama to get rid of Alabama players who were given scholarships because of their political class, their political influence. He also told Alabama alumni at the very beginning, do not get involved recruiting players. He would not allow it. He had an unfortunate incident. He was criticized, frankly, because his players hit so hard. These players were very aggressive players. And sometimes some of the opposing coaches felt like they might be doing a little dirty playing, not playing classic football. He was criticized, particularly for coaching dirty plays, when Alabama's Darwin Halt smashed into Georgia Tech's Chick Granning on a punt return in 1961. He leveled him. Bryant insisted that he did not encourage such tactics. The play, though, contributed to a long-running feud between Bryant and Georgia Tech coach Bobby Dowd. Alabama and Georgia Tech stopped playing with the Yellow Jackets as they left the SEC, but years later it was Bryant who offered to sponsor Georgia Tech in a return bid to the SEC. In 1961, Bear writes, we had the best team in college football. Not the biggest, but the best. We certainly weren't very big, and we didn't have great numbers either. As a quarterback, Pat Trammell had no ability. He couldn't do anything but win. As a leader, I have never had another like him. It was with that team that Bryant won his first national championship. While Trammell had what Bryant described as no ability except to win, there was another favorite quarterback of Bryant's who came along a few years later. He was loaded with talent and attitude. His name was Joe Namath, later to be known as Broadway Joe. He was from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. His daddy was a mill worker. His parents were divorced. He lived with his mama. Most of his friends were black. He made money by running messages for people around the pool room and for shining shoes. Bear described him this way. Joe said that no one was going to hustle him. His background was nothing like anything he saw at Alabama. He didn't speak the language. Most of his talk was lighthearted and quick, street talk, really. A Vanderbilt tackler hit him pretty good when Joe was a sophomore, and according to our players said, hey, number 12, what's your name? Joe said, you'll see it in the headlines tomorrow. With Namath at the head, the Tide went 10-0, then 9-2, then 10-1. Bryant observed that Namath ended up with a Southern accent and a deep, deep love for the South. A moment which Bryant grew to regret but would not have changed happened with Joe Namath. This is what he has to say. I don't guess anybody would think much of what Joe did nowadays, including myself, but he was supposed to be a leader, so he had to live by the rules. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, and it was to the greatest athlete I ever coached. What he did was he suspended Namath for the last 2 games of the regular season. Namath was reported out partying and drinking beer, and that was against team rules. So Bryant suspended him. He received a great deal of criticism from Alabama fans, but he stuck to his guns. Namath never challenged that suspension, publicly or privately. There was another incident that marred a little of Bryant's time at Alabama, and it involved the Saturday Evening Post. And it brought students out to rally to support their coach. The Saturday Evening Post had published a story in 1963 accusing Bryant and Georgia athletic director Wally Butts of fixing the 1962 Alabama-Georgia game. Butts sued. Bryant sued. Butts won the lawsuit. Bryant settled after for $360,000. And those two cases helped put Saturday Evening Post magazine out of business. Bryant met in 1963 with U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Kennedy was having an intense fight with Alabama Governor George Wallace and the University of Alabama over the integration of the university. It's interesting to know, years earlier, Bryant had gone to the Kentucky president and urged him to allow integration on that campus for his football team. It would be some years later and at Alabama before that would happen for Coach. In 1969, there was a time when Bryant considered leaving Bama to coach in the pros. He was offered a spot coaching head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and of course, there was a lot more money involved. He thought about it, he changed his mind, and the Dolphins hired Don Shula. Alabama's first black scholarship football player was Wilbur Jackson, who signed with Bryant in December of 1969. Bryant started noticing Darrell Royal and something that was being called the wishbone offense. He decided maybe he needed to change some offensive tactics of his own. So he studied Texas and that wishbone. And as a result, when he played Southern Cal in 1971, he stomped them. He was a religious man, even though at times he couldn't understand his parents' very ultra-conservative religious views. He said, "Never be too proud to get down on your knees and pray." And he would pray often with his football players, not only as a team, but individually when they came to him for help. In 1972, an old nemesis was revived. Remember that when he was 13 and that he wrestled that bear that bit his ear and made him bleed? September 1972, the bear is challenged to a rematch by the grandson of that bear that he had wrestled and earned his nickname. It's all part of the fun that goes on with college athletics. And the bear loved it. The little guy dressed in as the opposing bear's grandson had a good time too. Besides that houndstooth hat, Bryant was also known on the campus of Alabama for his tower. It was painted bright crimson. It had a spiral staircase that went up to a ledge, and on that ledge, that landing, he could stand and see everything that happened on the field during practice. In Maxim.com, this was written: "Alone every practice, he ascended the tower, watching the action below with a grim coldness, occasionally barking an order, inspecting his minions as they twitched at the sound of his voice as assuredly as if they were puppets attached to strings tied around his fingers. And if something or someone particularly got his gall, he unlatched the chain, came down from the clouds, and intervened directly." Assistant coach Judd Hennessy said, When you heard the chain at the entrance of the tower rattle, you did not want to be in his line of sight. Over time, Bear Bryant became the most important representative for the University of Alabama, not just athletics, not just football, but the entire university. His ease before groups of all sizes, from all backgrounds, and his terrific sense of humor made him the ideal spokesperson for Alabama's attributes. Bob Hope noticed when Bob Hope did a show at the Tuscaloosa Memorial Coliseum, he invited two stars to star with him, Bear Bryant and Joe Namath, and both of them did very, very well. In 1980, Time magazine honored the coach with the cover and named him America's Super Coach. Even Coca-Cola celebrated the Bear by producing special edition, limited edition Coca-Colas with Bear's portrait, of course, with the houndstooth hat and the Alabama A on it. My husband has one. Bear decided to retire in December 1982. It was time for him to spend time with Mary Harmon, his family, and his friends. His last football game as coach was on December 29th, 1982 in the Liberty Bowl, and Alabama won it 15-12 over Illinois. Less than a month after his final game, Bear Bryant died of a heart attack in a Tuscaloosa hospital. It shook Alabama to its foundation. Alabama, the state, not just Alabama, the university. There had been health concerns. There was a general awareness that his health had been declining. One, in 1977, he had collapsed from congestive heart failure. Not long after that, he checked himself into an alcohol rehab center in Shelby County. He stayed a month, but then later he resumed his drinking. He was also a 3-pack-a-day Chesterfield smoker from basically childhood. So he had done things to his own health. His funeral took place on January 28th in '83, with hundreds attending the memorial service at Tuscaloosa's First United Methodist Church and more than 5,000 at the graveside service at the Elmwood Cemetery in Birmingham. Many notables from football came to Tuscaloosa to pay their respects, including former players Joe Namath, Richard Todd, Marty Lyons, and Leroy Jordan. Coaches attended, including Bud Wilkinson, Vince Dooley, Woody Hayes, Charlie Pell, Frank Broyles, Pat Dye, and Ray Perkins. As was fitting for him, there was a floral arrangement of the houndstooth hat atop his casket. An estimated 250,000 people, that would be 1 out of 12 Alabama citizens, paid their respects on that 55-mile route from Tuscaloosa to Birmingham. Mary Harmon requested that the motorcade pass Bryant-Denny Stadium, which was the Crimson Tide's home field, and drive within sight of Legion Field in Birmingham, scene of many of his great victories. Just 1 year later, at age 68, Mary Harmon, too, passed away. She had a stroke. She never regained consciousness. She was remembered at her funeral and by sports editors and by players as being the ideal team mom. She cared for her husband's players. She would ride on the team bus carrying the second and third string players instead of on the first string. They ended up their lives with 2 children and 5 grandchildren. There were honors, of course, that poured in. Super Bowl was dedicated to Bryant. Alabama's Maxwell Air Force Base sent planes to execute the missing man formation over the Rose Bowl. in his memory. A stamp was developed for him, and that was unveiled on the University of Alabama campus in '97. In '83, President Reagan posthumously awarded Bryant the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In '85, he was elected to the College Football Hall of Fame, and the College Football Coach of the Year award was renamed in his honor. And in '99, he was named coach of the Sports Illustrated All-Century College Football Team. Endurance. Never quit. It's the coolest, easiest cop-out in the world. Beautiful bronze statue honors Bear Bryant and Georgiann, two important coaches at Alabama. It stands in front of the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, and it was dedicated in April of 1997. USC coach John McKay said this about Bryant. He wasn't just a coach, he was the coach. So whether you follow college football or not, you still mostly likely heard of the name Bear Bryant. He was a larger-than-life personality. He was a remarkably effective motivator of young men. And he was a genuinely fine fellow from a very small spot, hardly noticeable on the American map, who used values he learned there as a child to influence countless people during his decades-long career. American sports, particularly collegiate football, were changed for the better because of his time. We should all be thankful for that.